This next section is the old Homestead and Limerick. And so these are some pictures that I showed last time I came on. The old homestead, the old barn, and the cornfield. And Main Street, Limerick, Maine, and Limerick Mills, Limerick, Maine. So I don't know how old these pictures are. But what I know is that Lorenzo left Maine, and as far as I can tell, he never went back. I mean, he didn't intend to never go back. He just found what he wanted in life and started living it. And he did have, there's some correspondence that he wrote back to his brothers and sisters, and one of his brothers, or some of them, he may have had some business interactions with, and met with them places. I don't know. I can't really remember. I mean, what's interesting, what I feel is neat about her, Alma, Lorenzo's daughter, writing about this is that she did not know firsthand the old homestead, or even Maine, or any of her uncles or aunts or cousins on that side of the family. And so her information about the old homestead was, I think, a cousin of hers. We'll figure it out along the way. But there's someone who writes a description of the place and the people, her uncles and aunts and cousins and stuff. So, I don't know, it might not be that interesting. What's interesting to me is that people didn't, if they moved away, they didn't get back together very much and didn't know each other as much. And so it's different than our times. Even though I moved away from my Compton family, I mean, I still kept in touch by writing letters, I guess, and phone calls, but I mean, at least once a year someone would come visit us, or we'd go visit them. Although I do understand and feel like there is, I mean, you can describe your cousin or aunt or uncle, or kind of put them into where they fall in the family. But the day-to-day learning from each other, I can understand that. My kids and I didn't get that as after I grew up and moved away. The day-to-day, knowing each other. Okay, so anyway, the old homestead and Limerick. David, who had come with his father, found it hard to adjust to the stepmother's ways. All right, David. I'm sorry, also, I'm going to show you this. My little cheat sheet that I just made a couple days ago. David, I think they're talking about Lorenzo's father. Okay, we'll go with that. If I find differently, I will let you know. Because Lorenzo's father's name is David, and his grandfather's name is David. So there's a David Sr. and a David Jr. David, who had come with his father, found it hard to adjust to the stepmother's ways. So he left for a short time and went to Exeter to find work. He not only found work, but he found Elsie. Okay, This is the grandfather, because grandfather David Watson Jr. He married Elsie, Elsy, and Else. They have it different spellings, different places. Doloff. Okay, but he found Elsie Doloff, the daughter of his employer, so much to his liking that they were married on the 17th of November, 1796, in Epping, a part of Exeter. Then David proudly took her back to live at Watson Hill. Many were the trees to be felled, the orchards to be planted, and the cows to be cared for. So Jonathan was exceedingly pleased when his son David and the new bride came to live with him. Okay, so Jonathan is Lorenzo's great-grandfather. His father's father's father. 3 houses were built by these men, one for David and his bride. They sewed and planed the lumber for their own land and built this sturdy home. It was built of hard wood, weatherboarded on the outside and inside, and lined with birch boards about 8 inches wide. Birch boards 15 inches wide were used for flooring. There were 6 spacious rooms, a large pantry, and a hall, while under the kitchen floor and 1 bedroom a cellar was dug. Elsie set about turning the house into a home, and soon the 4-poster beds boasted feather beds. And soon the 4-poster beds boasted 2 feather mattresses, covered with beautiful quilts, pieced together and quilted during the long winter evenings. She had chosen the Rising Sun and Princess Plume patterns as their dash and color reflected in the washbowl and pitcher of ironstone china that stood on the washstand of each bedroom. Home-braided rugs spotted the birch floor, and starched curtains hung at the windows where one could look down and the slope and across the meadow to the towering pine forests. David and Elsie were very happy in this most comfortable home. Their girls, Sally, Mary, and Betsy Hasty, Betsy Hasty, I think that's her name, who they raised, married and moved away. Oh, okay, they're girls. Sally, Mary, and Betsy married and moved away. Their son David Jr. stayed on at the old homestead, shouldering the responsibilities of the place that was someday to become his. David Jr. This is Lorenzo's grandfather. When David Jr. was 26 years old, he married Sally S. Day, daughter of Stephen Day and Lydia Pendexter Day, and brought his bride to live at Watson Hill, as his father had brought his young bride to this home. This house was 2½ miles from the center of Limerick, located on what has always been called Watson Hill. When I last visited it, okay, so Alma's saying that she has been there too. Yes, of course. When I last visited it, it showed little wear from 4 generations of Watsons having lived on in it. All the family referred to it as the old homestead. When I was there, it was owned by Guy, Hal, and Louise, who we call Lulu, all unmarried children of Stephen Edwin Watson. Stephen Edward Watson. Let me just look. We can look at the picture back here, for which you haven't seen yet. It is a bunch of the children. Actually, that's David and his next wife, Susan. But we're not there yet. I just want to see. Stephen Edwin is the third child of them. Okay. Where was I? Back to the page. Sorry. So this Stephen and his, okay, let me just read on here. When I was there, it was owned by Guy, Hal, and Lulu, all unmarried children of Stephen Edwin Watson, and therefore nephews and niece to Lorenzo Dow. Recently, it had been sold to a wealthy man of Massachusetts, who I understand uses it for a summer home. At first, the water for the old homestead was pumped into wooden troughs from wells back of the house. The troughs were hand-hewn from large birch logs. Later, the water was drawn by an iron pump into the pantry. When the house was erected, enclosed passageways were built that extended from the kitchen out to the woodshed. Thence on to the barn, so it would be easier to get wood and care for the livestock during the bitter winter months. These passageways also saved hours of time shoveling snow. There were 400 acres in this estate, hardwood timberland, meadows, wheat fields, and all kinds of fruit trees, flocks of geese and ducks along the brooks, and cattle and horses in the big barn. It was a land of plenty. There was a fireplace in each room, no stoves for many years. There were high-posted bedsteads with a feather bed or two on each. The little children had to climb upon the beds with the help of chairs. 2 grandfather clocks struck the hours, one in the kitchen and one in the front room. All mirrors had painted pictures at the tops. Rare dishes from the old country graced the prime cupboards. Quoted from a letter written by Sadie Watson Harper, daughter of Uncle James. I visited the old cemetery, where 4 generations have been laid to rest. It is a most beautiful spot, surrounded by tall evergreens and the white birch. There are headstones standing without any lettering on. Others had fallen face down, but after scraping off about 7 or 8 inches of leaf mold, the lettering was as plain as if it had just been done. The stones were made of a light-colored granite. These stones were nearly 100 years old. I visited this in June of 1944, Decoration Day, and I bowed my head and thanked the Lord for such noble pioneers who had braved the wilds of Maine to make a livelihood for them and their children. Sally had 4 girls. 2 of them died before their mother, who died before Sally died. She died at the age of 26. A year later, David Jr. married Sally's younger sister. Her name was Susan Pendexter Day. So that's the mother that Lorenzo comes from. The mother that Lorenzo comes from, Susan Pendexter. So let me show you back to that picture again. David, and this one's Susan. Okay. So, besides her dowry, Susan brought a deep love for her husband and love and understanding for the two girls who were her sister's children, Alice Jane and Frances Ann. Susan, a tall, brown-haired and dark-eyed woman, was an excellent cook and an indomitable worker. She gave birth to 10 children, raising to womanhood and manhood 8 of the 10. Twin girls, born 2 years before Lorenzo Dow, died soon after birth. The 10 children were Clorinda, who they called Clara, and she married Buzzle. Her last name's Buzzle. And then the boys: David, Stephen Edward, Daniel, Charles Freeman, and the twin girls, and Lorenzo Dow, James Milton Kennard Pollock, and Millard Fillmore. So one girl who survived were one girl and these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 boys. I quote this taken from a letter written by Lulu Watson to me. Lulu is the daughter of Stephen Edwin Watson, which we already figured out before. Dr. David Watson, our uncle, was next. Oh, wait, let me just tell you this. So, Lulu is going to describe all of Lorenzo's brothers and sisters, and maybe some other people, but it's interesting, I guess. So, Dr. David Watson, our uncle, was next older than my father. I don't know the date of his marriage to Annie Eaton. She came from Limerick, Maine. He was married before he went in the Civil War. After the war, he practiced medicine in East Parsonsfield. My father and mother lived there then. They liked Uncle Doctor, and he was considered a good doctor, but his wife wasn't much help to him. Some thought she drank and doped. After he went to Conway, New NH, my folks couldn't go back and forth much, as it seemed quite a distance to go. Aunt Alice used to go up there and visit for a while. Arm or Hal would take her up and go after her. When my sister Mabel was sick, not long before she died, Uncle Doctor and Aunt Angie came down to see her. I remember them. They walked out over the hill with my father and my brother, and I went too, but I can't remember how they looked, as I was only 4 years old. Mabel died February 1891. Dr. Watson died July 8, 1891. He had pneumonia. Dr. Watson was thin, blue eyes, and dark hair, and I guess he was medium height. Yep, Uncle Dr. David Watson. Okay. Hang on here. Yep. Now then, she's going to talk about Stephen Edwin Watson. My father, that's Lulu's father, had brown hair and blue eyes and a good complexion, with red cheeks, and was quite tall, but not as tall as Uncle Jim. Years ago, he had a beard, as most men did at that time. I can't remember him back then. Afterwards, he always had a mustache. He was kind of thin, but gained as he grew older. He liked to talk and laugh. He taught school and then went to East Parsonsfield and was in business with Uncle Jeff Pendexter. Then he came to Watson's Hill and taught school for a while. After that, he was farming. Okay, that was her father. And then we go to Uncle Dan Watson. Let me see him. Dan, I think, is Daniel. He's the fourth child. So that's Dan. So this picture is on Family Searched, but I'll show it to you again, the whole thing. Uncle Dan Watson was next to my father. He taught school before and after he went in the war. He studied law and was admitted to the bar. He went to Missouri and taught school there. Then he went to Kansas and practiced law and was in the insurance business. He was going with my Aunt Mary Loogie, my mother's sister. He was 2 years older. She was 2 years older than he. He asked her to marry him and go west with him. His father and mother were hoping she would marry him, as he was going away, and they would feel better if he had a wife they knew from here. I guess they never expected to see him again, but she thought so much of East and East Parsonsfield and her father and mother, and she knew that she might never come back to East again. I don't know whether she would have married him if he had stayed here or not. He went away when Guy and Arm were small. I think from what they said, he was dark, had dark hair. I don't know what color his eyes were. I have pictures taken of him before he went away. That is about all I know. He never came home, so his folks never saw him again. Uncle Charles Watson taught, okay, now we're going to the next kid, Charles Watson. Taught school before he was married. After he was married, he lived in East Parsonsfield and worked in the shops. Then he went to South Cornish on a farm, the Pugsley's farm, where his wife's mother and sister lived. I don't know how long he lived there before he went to Kezar Falls. He worked in the woolen mills there. I used to see Uncle Charlie once in a while. I never saw him when he was young. He had dark hair and blue eyes. I think he must have looked like his father some as he grew older. I don't think he was quite as tall as my father. Warner always thought a lot of his Uncle Charlie, and he enjoyed talking with him and often said that Uncle Charlie was a joy. Now, Uncle Lorenzo, your father, you know how he looked. That's all she says about him. And then we go to Uncle James Watson. Was very tall, very thin, very dark, and very plain. I never saw him when he was young. He lived in Boston, Mass, and was in the laundry business for a number of years. After a while, he put on weight and was a large man and looked much better. I think he must have looked some like his mother. They always said she was tall, dark, and thin. Uncle Millard was the youngest of the family. He taught school like his brothers and taught singing school. He had dark hair and brown eyes. They said he was good looking. He was killed on Nat Watson's Hill in Limerick. The horse ran away. Addie Sawyer, Ada's husband, was with him. It was a great shock to all of his folks. He was young and well. It made it very hard for his folks. My mother said she would always remember the night he was killed. Someone drove up to the door, and my father went to the door. He came in and put his face against my mother's and told her Millard was dead. It was just before the twins were born. Millard was engaged to Nancy Furlong. She lived in Limerick. Aunt Clara, from her pictures, was tall and thin. Okay, Aunt Clara, that's Clarissa. Clorinda. Oh, sorry. Clorinda. Aunt Clara. From her pictures, was tall and thin. She had black hair and brown eyes. She put on weight, and her hair was nearly white the last time I saw her. A long time after she died, I saw her cousin Lydia Stone Cole, Aunt Elmira Day Stone Ridland's daughter. She was shorter than Aunt Clara, but she reminded me so much of her, the way she talked and laughed. So I guess that Aunt Clara took back after the days some. I think it's supposed to say, I guess that Aunt Clara took after, maybe that's the way they said it back then, took after the days. The days is the last name of the ancestors that she took after some. Anyway, Sally Day, grandfather's first wife, had brown hair and blue eyes, and Aunt Alice and Aunt Frances had brown hair and blue eyes and fair complexion. Grandfather David Watson Jr. was kind of short and stout as he grew older, so they told me. My grandfather and grandmother on both sides died before I was born. David Jr. was not only kind and gentle, but a very considerate man. He was medium height with a fair complexion and blue eyes. For several years after his marriage, he taught school in Limerick. He knew little about livestock at first, but decided he would get a herd of milch cows. His first lesson came when he purchased a good-looking cow, and after taking her home, found that she would give no milk. Upon informing the man from whom he had purchased the cow, he received the farmer's answer in these words: "All the better for that. She'll make orderly beef." David Jr. took it good-naturedly, and from then on, when things did not turn out as he expected them to, someone in the family would always say, "All the better for that. She'll make orderly beef." It wasn't many years after the purchase of his first cow until David Jr. had many milch. It might spelled Milch, but they might be meaning milk cows. Milch cows. For sale. One story is told of how a Mr. Brown came to purchase a cow, but didn't have the money to pay for her. So kind-hearted David Jr., whose words was as good as his bond, and expected all others to be the same way, permitted the gentleman to sign a note for the cow. After it was made out, the men were not sure who should hold the note, but decided Farmer Brown should be the one. So he would know when the note was due. So off Mr. Brown went with the cow and the promissory note. However, he justified the trust placed in him by returning with the money and also the note on due date. Good Mr. Brown. Characteristics of Lorenzo's ancestors could be mentioned here. They were very level-headed men of a calm temperament, able to meet and take care of any emergency that came up in their pioneer lives. They were practical and mechanical, and of a versatile nature, able to draw plans for ships, mills, houses, barns, etc., then build them, carrying out the smallest detail with exactness. They took pride in creating things. I find them to be fair critics and honest, conscientious judges, good sportsmen in contests, taking defeat well, willing that it was just. Feeling that it was just. The following statement of one of the Watsons verifies this. George L. Watson, designer of the Valkyrie, said, "The Vigilant outsailed us on every point. She is a remarkable board. It was a fair race." Taken from Ridland's History of Saco Valley. These ancestors have been called reckless at times because of plunging head ahead to do what they thought best, but the appreciation of life and love of their fellow men caused them to use caution. In every war of this country they have bravely borne their loads. Charles B. Driscoll, author of newspaper column New York Day by Day, once said, "As I think it over, it seems fairly clear that the worthwhile people I know are interesting and important because of their climbing sawmills on their own." Sorry, let me just say that I meant to say it reads windmills, not sawmills. As I think it over, it seems fairly clear that the worthwhile people I know are interesting and important because of their climbing windmills on their own. As I look over my father's life, okay, I think we're back to Alma talking. As I look over my father's life, I became amazed and spellbound, contemplating the many worthwhile things that he accomplished. His lack of fear plus a natural talent for doing whatever he thought best altogether on his own made his accomplishments outstanding. He went from the quiet of his New England home into battle to fight for the union of his country, from a life of comparative ease to one of sacrifice and service. Lorenzo Dow was always called Lo at home. He had 6 brothers and 5 sisters, including the 2 girls of Sally. He always spoke of these 2 girls as his sisters, not half-sisters, and loved them dearly. Uncle James kept many letters of Lo's that show his devotion to these 2 girls. Frances Ann, so she's going to talk about these 2 girls, I think. Frances Ann married and had 4 children, but Alice never married, but taught school for over 50 years. She lived and died at the old homestead. All of David Jr.'s children taught school. The oldest boy, David, became a doctor. Daniel and Lorenzo became lawyers. David, the father, taught school several years and also held many official positions in the town of Limerick. There was always sufficient work to keep the boys busy. There was planting, harvesting, many cows to milk, and animals to feed and water. During the late spring and early summer, they planted large fields of grain, potatoes, and corn. They always planted a vegetable garden on the hill back of the house. There was a great deal of cultivating to be done all summer, but of course there was no watering to do. With fall came the harvesting of all the crops. The hand scythe was used for cutting the corn, hay, and grain. Most of the products they had for sale had to be freighted to Portland, 60 miles over hills, and it had to be done in the early fall before the snows blocked the roads. Sufficient wood had to be cut, hauled, and stacked in the woodshed to last the year round. The hardwood trees were felled, sawed into lumber, and taken to the nearest seaport, where there was always a ready market in shipbuilding. Lo always found time to ride his horses and take off over the hills to explore his loved nature. He loved nature, and he loved this great part of our country. Helping gather eggs or milk the cows in the big barn was always preceded by romps with the older boys, from one side of the loft to the other, and then sliding down the mounds of hay to feed the already sleek cattle or fat horses. Helping gather and store the winter apples and making cider were real fun, because with the fun was the real joy of living. The Watson boys got a great deal of pleasure out of the fall work and the neighborhood parties, or bees, as they called them. In the fall, when the corn had been gathered, they would ask the neighborhood boys over to a corn husking bee and offer a prize to the one who could husk the greatest number of ears of corn in a certain length of time. The prize usually was one of their mother's mince or pumpkin pies, for she was noted for her excellent pie making. After the husking ended, there was plenty of pie and cider for all. The neighborhood enjoyed all kinds of athletic sports. Lo was the champion 1-mile racer. He was very agile, and one trick that he liked to do was grasp a hoe handle about 1 foot from the ground, then put his head under his hands and turn his body completely around with his feet still on the ground, then bring himself into an upright position. He could do this trick even in later years. Harper Watson, a cousin, was the strongest. None of the boys could equal him in wrestling or lifting. When Harper was 8 years of age, no two men could take a hickory stick from his left hand. The Holland boys, who lived by the large pond about a mile away, came out ahead in the swimming and diving contests. Lowe took delight in being the first on the farm to ride an untamed horse. The following story is a family favorite. I'm going to read this one in the next episode.